Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping right into one of the most unsettling yet absolutely profound archaeological mysteries of the ancient world. We're going to explore the mystery of the missing skulls and how early death cults might have actually sparked the dawn of human civilization. When we picture the dawn of civilization, we usually imagine early humans figuring out how to plant wheat, settling down into cozy farming villages, and then, eventually getting around to building temples. But what if that entire timeline is completely backwards? When archaeologists began excavating the earliest monumental sites in the Near East, places in modern-day Turkey and Syria, they started finding bodies that were completely missing their heads. And we're not talking about one or two isolated incidents here. This was a widespread, incredibly intentional practice. So why did our Neolithic ancestors deliberately remove the skulls of their dead? Was it for war trophies, human sacrifice, or something far more complex? To figure this out, we really have to look closely at the physical evidence they left behind. Let's kick off our investigation at a site in modern-day Syria called Tel Karamel, and honestly, this place is staggering. It boasts the oldest circular stone towers in the entire world, predating even the famous Tower of Jericho by roughly 2 millennia. We are talking about a permanent, stone-built settlement from around 10,650 BC. That is literally a time before humans had even figured out how to make pottery. And it's right here, hidden among these ancient stones, that researchers uncovered a massive clue regarding our missing skulls. Archaeologists dug up the remains of 34 individuals scattered across 23 different graves at this site. And almost all of them shared a chilling characteristic that immediately ruled out the idea that these were just simple, random burials. The forensic evidence paints a really fascinating and kind of gruesome picture. First off, all 34 individuals were adults, which tells us that infants and children were treated differently, maybe buried somewhere else entirely. But the most revealing part is how the bones tell a story about exactly how these skulls were removed. In some cases, there are distinct cut marks showing the heads were severed shortly after death. We know this because the first vertebra actually remained attached to the skull. But in other cases, the lower jaw and vertebrae were left right there with the skeleton, which means the skull was carefully removed only after the flesh had completely decayed. Going to such extreme lengths proves these weren't acts of random violence. This was a highly specific, organized head cult. They clearly viewed the skull as something incredibly vital, maybe the seat of the soul, or an ongoing physical connection to their ancestors. So you might be wondering, how did they manage to cleanly remove these skulls after the body decayed? Well, it points to a practice called excarnation, which seems to have been the centerpiece of regional death cults across the ancient Near East. Excarnation is basically a funerary practice where you deliberately leave a body exposed to the elements. You let nature, specifically scavengers like vultures and other birds of prey, strip away the soft tissue. Once the bones are clean, they can be collected, separated, and venerated. This perfectly explains how some of those skulls at Tel Kormamel were removed without a single cut mark on the bone. The community was literally working in tandem with the natural world to process their dead. And seeing artifacts from this era brilliantly illustrates the jarring juxtaposition of these ancient people. On one hand, they were practicing what we'd probably consider pretty brutal, morbid mortuary rituals. Yet on the other hand, they possessed the incredible artistic sophistication required to carve gorgeous, naturalistic limestone pieces like this wild boar, right alongside perfectly balanced, massive stone megaliths. They absolutely were not primitive cavemen. They were highly organized, deeply spiritual people with a rich, if somewhat dark, view of the cosmos. Based on the archaeological evidence, we can actually reconstruct this step-by-step ritual, which probably happened at designated regional sanctuary sites. Imagine the scene. A recently deceased community member is carried into a sacred, demarcated area. The body is laid out, maybe on a wooden frame. Then the community just waits. They wait for wild animals to descend from the sky and strip the flesh. Finally, the clean bones and skulls are gathered up, and the skull, which was clearly the ultimate prize, is taken away for specific ritual use, or buried beneath the floors of their circular monuments. Now, if you're looking for hard proof of this grand, grim ritual, we just have to travel about 55 miles east of the Euphrates River to the monumental site of Göbekli Tepe. This place is packed with corroborating evidence. During early excavations, archaeologists didn't find any permanent domestic houses, but they did find over 100,000 fragments of wild animal bones. That's a massive scale of communal feasting. Even more telling, those famous, massive stone T-pillars are heavily carved with images of vultures, insects, and arachnids. And the real smoking gun? They've uncovered actual fragments of human bones hidden in the dirt in the niches right behind those stone pillars. It looks like Göbekli Tepe wasn't just a temple, it was likely a huge regional center specifically built for this excarnation ritual and death cult. But here's the thing. Göbekli Tepe wasn't operating in a vacuum. It was part of a larger web we now call the Taş Tepeler network. Nearby sites, like Karahan Tepe, completely shared this complex, skull-focused cosmology. In fact, Karahan Tepe has given us some of the most striking evidence of this head cult, including these incredibly lifelike 3D human heads carved straight out of limestone. There's even a famous carving there depicting a serene human head emerging from the body of a snake. All these communities were actively participating in a widespread cultural conversation, united by their reverence for human heads, the spirits of the dead, and the fierce animal world around them. Okay, so here's why this is a real game changer. This entire discovery completely flips our understanding of human history on its head. For the longest time, the old model was that humans invented farming first, which gave them the free time to settle down, build cities, and then, eventually invent religion. But this evidence proves a totally new model. Humans developed incredibly complex religions and death cults first. To honor these practices and their ancestors, they gathered in massive numbers to carve giant pillars and perform these excarnations. And it was the staggering, monumental effort of organizing these morbid rituals that actually forced these hunter-gatherers to invent agriculture. They literally had to figure out how to domesticate wild wheat just to feed the massive crowds of pilgrims and builders. The late, great archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who originally excavated Göbekli Tepe, summed it up perfectly. He said, "First the temple, then the city." The absolute human need to venerate the dead, to process their skulls, and to come together for these vast communal rituals was the actual spark that ignited human civilization. Religion didn't follow civilization, it created it. To put this all into perspective, let's track the timeline. We start at 10,650 BC with the decapitated burials and stone towers at Tel Karamel. Fast forward to 9,000 BC, and this culture is mobilizing hundreds of people to carve and move 16-foot limestone pillars at Göbekli Tepe. By 8,700 BC, they're crafting stunning 3D sculptures at Karahan Tepe. We see these intense, ritualistic death cults thriving for thousands of years. But then right around 8,000 BC, something dramatic happens. These incredible monuments are deliberately buried under mountains of dirt and refuse. Why? Because the intense around-the-clock labor of farming and animal husbandry had finally taken over. The agricultural world they had accidentally created to feed their religious gatherings eventually made their massive death cult temples completely obsolete. So, what is the big takeaway from this explainer? It's that our earliest, most monumental achievements as a species were driven not by simple survival or economics, but by our profound symbolic connection to the people who came before us. The real reason these ancient skulls were so meticulously removed wasn't out of savagery at all. It was an organized, deeply sacred duty to their ancestors. It was this powerful, shared belief system that managed to unite scattered hunter-gatherers, allowing them to collaborate on a scale that had never been seen before in human history. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought to ponder. If a collective devotion to the dead and the ritualistic preservation of their skulls was powerful enough to drive our ancestors to invent agriculture and build the very foundations of civilization, what do the massive structures we build today say about our own modern priorities? Are we still building things that unite us in deep, meaningful ways, or have we lost that ancient, powerful thread? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history you think you know.